For Inside Carolina, I'm Taylor Vippolis, and this is Shot and Vipp, where I'm joined by my former teammate, former Carolina linebacker and Carolina analyst, Jeff Schoettmer. Shot, we're sitting here on a Friday, and we're going into the college football weekend, but we kind of have the peace of mind already. North Carolina started their season off 1-0, beating Minnesota. You were in Minnesota at the game. What were your biggest takeaways being on field level, watching Carolina get that win?
It was great. Obviously, college football season is back. We got the win, but I want to first start by just saying, thoughts and prayers to Max Johnson and his family. We received the news about an hour or two ago that he broke his femur and he's out for the year. Just to see the anguish in his family's face, his mom and dad, on the TV copy, and obviously he's been through a lot, and to break your leg in your first start and be out for the year, it's such a tough way to start your career at North Carolina. So just thoughts and prayers to him, speedy recovery, and the team's got his back, and I know Coach Brown will do whatever he can to help them and help Max along in his journey. Besides that, I just want to run through about 10 to 12 things that I observed. Obviously, I was at the game and I was on the sideline, so you see a lot of things up close and personal that you don't see, on the TV copy or watching the game from your home or even watching the game from the stands. So the first thing was, I talked about it in the preview show for the season, is we're going to have to win ugly this year. And that's exactly what we did. We played complementary football. We got production from all three units. So that was a positive. Ja'Kai Leftwich and Travis Shaw recovering fumbles were two massive plays in the game. One was on the Conner Harrell fumble, and then one was when Omarion Hampton forced the fumble. But those two guys jumping on the ball in that scenario, that gave us a chance to win, and ultimately we won the game because of it. So shout out to the big fellas for hustling to the ball and recovering those balls and keep it in our possession.
The Leftwich one too, it almost looked like there was no chance Carolina recovered that.
Yeah, I was right there, and I was like, it's their ball. It's their ball. Thank God for the holding call on the 15-yard run on Minnesota's last drive. Without that holding call, they had the ball inside the 20 with 40 seconds to go. So thank God for the refs actually calling a holding call in that situation, because you don't see that very often, especially on the last drive of the game. I want to give Max some credit. I was on the sideline at one point, and he showed some very good short area quickness at one point. He scurried over to the ref to get in his ear, and to see a 73-year-old move around like that, I want to give him this prop. So he, in this offseason, I guess he was in the lab with Coach Hess and working on his short area quickness. So our two offensive tackles are massive. They're good athletes, and they're massive. So I think they're only going to continue to develop. Obviously, it was the first start for both of them. So I like what I saw out of them, honestly. But you can't teach size and speed and athleticism and foot speed, and they have it. And Willie Lampkin is a legit 5'11". It's a sight to see him standing next to those two 6'8", 6'9" tackles. I gain more respect for Willie Lampkin each time I watch him, because he is a legit 5'11" playing against really, really big and really talented players. So good for him. On the other side, Minnesota's offensive line was massive. They're going to be the biggest O-line we see this year. Coming out of a timeout, they're standing, waiting for the ref to spot the ball, and they're standing next to Travis Shaw, Ritzy, Des Evans, and they are bigger than all of them. And those guys are on our D-line are not small dudes. And it was just a sight to see how big those guys were. A true Big Ten Midwest team. Max Johnson's touchdown in the first half, that was a Drake May-esque run. It was very impressive to see what he did, navigating through the pocket, stepping up, pump faking, and, diving in the end zone. So I want to give him kudos for that, because that was a big touchdown for us. The drive to start the second half was massive. Minnesota had all the momentum, and obviously we didn't get a touchdown, but we got, points out of it. But we moved the ball down the field, and that kind of gave our team confidence, coming out of the half. So that was a huge drive. We don't have very much explosiveness at receiver. I would say all those guys look like they would be third or fourth options on teams in the past. And, I don't know how quickly we can get them to get more explosive in season, but that's definitely something that caught my eye being on field level. Hampton looks like the ultimate creative player. I was standing next to him right when he came out from halftime, and he is the most chiseled running back I've ever been around. So we'll keep feeding him, and he's our bell cow for sure. Burnett's leg strength has noticeably gotten better. I mean, he's kicking those balls with great trajectory, great height. And the other thing about him, his confidence is just through the roof right now. Look back 2 years ago, he misses that kick versus NC State, and all of UNC wants to fire this guy and never hear from him again, wants him to transfer, and look what he's done since that moment. So that's just a lesson to not write kids off. Kids can develop and grow and get better, and I want to give him more kudos than probably anyone on this podcast or anyone on the team for being able to bounce back and develop. And, he was a huge part in why we won the game. We had more cohesion on the defensive staff than, any time I've seen in the last 4 to 5 years. I'm just talking about their sideline camaraderie, chemistry, the way they communicate with each other, the positivity they have amongst each other, amongst the players, the adjustments they're making. They're not yelling at each other. They're having, open communication, and it was good to see. Geoff Collins' presence on the sideline, I was really impressed with that. He's very positive. He's not one of those DCs that when, the opponent gets a first down that he's hanging his head or yelling at a player. He's on to the next play. And I just love his presence. And I think a good defense always, can draw from their leader, which is, the defensive coordinator, and he injected confidence into them. So not only did he make good calls, but his presence was a huge reason of why we're successful, I think. The green dot communication was interesting to me, especially on defense. So obviously one player has the mic in his helmet, usually Power Eccles. But what I noticed was all the defense still had these wristbands like, you had in Pee Wee where you had the plays on your wrist. And it was just interesting to see that dynamic of, Power's getting the call, but they're also looking at the wristband. So that's just, an observation I had. I think they'll develop that as the season gets going, and they'll make adjustments to how they, communicate plays. Not as much pressure from the defense as, we were expecting all offseason. Geoff Collins had this notoriety about him that he just brings the house and brings pressure from every different which way. But, to me, looking at it on the field level, I didn't see like many all-out pressures or tons of 6-man pressures. It was a lot of 4- and 5-man rush, but obviously it worked for this game. Huzzie is such a special football player, and we'll get more into him, but just watching him on the field, how he competes down in and down out, just the versatility he shows, special teams, defense, slot corner, blitzing, his footwork, his tackling. It's just him and Hampton are the two best players we have on our team. So next point, Ritzie's sack in the second half. It was his third sack of the game. The quarterback's kind of rolling to our sideline, and Ritzie hunts him down inside out. I was standing probably 10 yards away from him, and that was one of the most impressive defensive line plays I've seen in the last couple of years, because that quarterback was a decent athlete, and Ritzie just hawked him down and took a great angle. And he was coming from the back, and he didn't horse collar him. So that was maturity from Ritzie, being able to get him down without drawing a flag. The tackling on defense, it was kind of on par for the first game. We did have some good tackling, but we did miss too many at times, where it was mostly in the secondary. We were overrunning guys, taking bad angles, but I think that's something that we can get cleaned up, and we'll get more into that as the podcast goes. But I wrote down these observations. I just want to kind of get them out there and get them into the world. And that's kind of what my opening thoughts of the game.
Yeah, I think going off a few of those thoughts, the receiver conversation, I think, is an interesting one, because a lot of times when the fans are watching the games on TV, their eyes are just drawn to the quarterbacks and what the quarterbacks are doing. And by no means do I think the quarterback play was good for Carolina yesterday. In fact, I would say more often than not, you're going to lose games when your quarterbacks are playing like that. But they're also throwing or having to try to throw into extremely tight windows because your receivers aren't creating separation. And I saw a lot of the narrative before the season, like, why does Carolina need a number one receiver? Why do they need a Tez Walker or De'Ami Brown type talent and not just have a bunch of guys who fit that 2-3-4 mold? And it's the reason why we saw in the Minnesota game. There's nobody that can consistently create that separation, therefore taking the attention away from the defense. And the defenses are able to just essentially play everybody straight up. And the result of that is a quarterback that looks really hesitant to throw the ball because he's like, hey, if I throw this ball, this is a pretty small window where I kind of have to be perfect. My receivers are already dropping it. They're not making the best plays on the ball already. And if I do make a bad throw here, there's a chance that it turns into a catastrophic play. And from everything we heard about Max Johnson, his goal was to kind of limit the catastrophic plays. And one of the reasons why he was ahead of Conner Harrell all training camp. Another point off some of the things you mentioned, the offensive line, massive. And I think that's one of Carolina's worries with somebody like Conner Harrell, who is a lot smaller in stature than somebody like Max Johnson. And I think a lot of their worries are around, can Conner Harrell even see over Leftwich and Green and Sampson when you have these guys who are like 6'7"? And we'll talk about how the quarterback position is going to play out going forward. But I do think that's part of the reason why Max Johnson was able to separate himself. Just knowing the coaching staff's confidence with both their quarterbacks in the pocket. Noah Burnette, the team MVP from yesterday's game. It's something that we saw when we were playing at Carolina, where at times at Carolina, we had a very shaky kicker that you couldn't really trust. And then once Nick Weiler kind of stepped into that role, it's like having another offensive weapon when your kicker can go out there with that level of confidence and be able to make a kick like that. It takes pressure off the offense when you are in a situation like Carolina was late in the game where they just needed a field goal to take the lead or retake the lead, where it's like that green target line. I know it's not on the field for people at the game and for the players on the field, but you can almost sense where that target line is when you're in the huddles and knowing what your kicker is doing. And for the most part, college kickers are very unreliable. You saw it with Minnesota right across from you, where the kicker doinks a chip shot field goal
27-yarder
early in the game, and then they're comparing him. I think they were calling him. I know you weren't listening to the TV broadcast, but I'm pretty sure the announcers were saying he was basically Minnesota's Nikola Jokic right before he went out there and missed the last field goal.
The good announcer, the announcer jinx. We appreciate that. Yeah.
The announcer jinx into fireworks going off. Yeah. Because Minnesota thought it went in. A few other points to hit on that you mentioned. Alijah Huzzie, there's two players on the Carolina defense where every time I watch them, I'm like, I could watch you play football every day with the level of effort, the IQ you play with, the just everything you bring to the field. When every time you're out there, you're making a winning play. Those are the guys you wish you had 11 of them. And it's for me, it's K'Mon Rucker and Alijah Huzzie on defense. And Alijah Huzzie in the game against Minnesota, he was targeted 4 times. He gave up 2 catches for 2 yards, 1 yard and 1 yard. And when you do have a number one like that, it was something that I noticed as the game was going on. When I'm watching the game and trying to think like, hey, where's Minnesota? Like my football mind is like, where's Minnesota going to try to go with this football? You kind of just have to find where Alijah Huzzie is and then say, okay, it's opposite of this, wherever that is. And that's kind of one of the ways that I think this Carolina defense can kind of cheat plays and try to figure it out, knowing that Alijah Huzzie is such a lockdown corner. Amari Campbell, I would give a helmet sticker or a game ball to, being able to punch that ball out with his club. We talked about it in a previous episode, knowing how difficult it is to play with a club and not being comfortable with it. But you see Campbell kind of turns it into a weapon and being able to peanut punch that ball out and create a takeaway. And also I just found this. It's a Nick Weiler stat. Noah Burnett's 52-yard field goal against Minnesota on Thursday was the longest field goal made by a Tar Heel since Nick Weiler hit a 54-yarder against Florida State. But I also being at the game, I thought one of the most impressive things, you mentioned the aspect of winning ugly. This team also had the adversity of the delay, playing through a rain, playing through watching your teammate break their leg on the field and having to come out after that. What would you just say about all the adversity that this Carolina team played through and was able to overcome, winning their first road game in a season opener against a Power 4 opponent for the first time since 1992? Because winning on the road, not easy in college football.
Not easy. I mean, I don't care who the opponent is, especially the opening game. And you don't truly know how your team's going to respond. You know, they've only practiced against each other all year. It's not like the NFL where you get preseason games and you get, joint practices where you're going against a different opponent. I thought the way they handled adversity and the way that our coaching staff coached them through this game and never blinked was the most important factor of the game. It wasn't, the X's and O's, the scheme. It was the mentality that we played with in terms of you hit the nail on the head. Like, you're about to go through, your pregame meal 3 hours before the game, and you get it, and you find out now that the game's delayed an extra hour. So the common fan, they don't think that's a big deal, but football players are all about routine. So are coaches, and that completely throws them off. So you have to regroup and credit Mac and the rest of the staff for, figuring out a plan on the fly to get them ready. Obviously the rain factor plays into it. You could see the tides turn in the game when, we went up 7-0 and then we threw an interception and they get the ball, in our 10-yard line, and then they score 2 plays later. The momentum just completely shifts. And then they go the next drive, they have a long drive and they go up 14-7 at halftime. And, we never blinked. And we handled that adversity well. Like I said, we came out the second half and we put points on the board to kind of get some momentum back in our court. And Max unfortunately breaks his leg. But what's even crazier is Conner goes in that drive. He's a key 3rd and 1, and we convert. We go down the field and we put points on the board. It's so tough when you have a catastrophic injury in the middle of the game, because it kind of you lose focus in the game a little bit. You just have this natural tendency. You're like, dang, one of my brothers, he got carted off the field. I'm more worried about him than this game. But you have to, relock in. And for us to go get points on that drive when there was a 10-minute delay and the emotions of Max getting carted off, and then even more adversity in the fourth quarter when we take the lead. They have a 5-minute drive in the fourth. They score to go up with 3-4 minutes to go. That's another challenge for us, and we stepped up to the plate and we go down the field and kick a field goal to put ourselves ahead. Obviously, we do enough to make them kick a long field goal to try to win the game. And you know how it is with college kickers. A 47-yarder is way different than a 32-yarder. They were about to have a 30, 35-yarder, and to make them kick a 47-yarder is a huge difference, and it's ultimately why we won the game. So kudos to Coach Brown, the staff, the players, everyone involved for, just fighting through all the adversity that was thrown their way during the game. And, we come out on the other side and we're 1-0. Half of the college football teams are going to be 0-1 and half are going to be 1-0. And I would way rather be on the half that's 1-0, because you can coach harder and you can make mistakes more when you're, after a win than a loss. It's tougher. Just the morale of the team it completely changes. Like that flight back home from Minnesota was probably a lot of fun. There's so much joy in winning. You get 12 opportunities and to take care of business. I don't care if the game was, if we won by 30 or by 2. Like, we won the game. So move on, and proud of those guys for handling business.
Offensively, we talked about the quarterback position and the quarterback play from the game against Minnesota. We touched on the receivers and their lack of separation and their lack of explosiveness. But when we're talking about where things did go right for Carolina offensively and why Carolina had a chance offensively, Omarion Hampton rushes for 129 yards. He rushes for more than 4 yards a carry against a defense that was coming downhill with Fitz from the secondary, knowing that they didn't respect what the Carolina quarterbacks and the Carolina receivers could do against them. Their main objective was stopping Hampton. Their second objective was stopping Hampton. Their third objective was stopping Hampton. They were not going to let Hampton beat them, yet Hampton still goes for over 100 yards. 92 of his 129 rushing yards came after contact. And at this point right now, with Max Johnson's injury, Carolina's kind of taking this step back to evaluate what they have to work with and how they can get creative offensively. But at the very least, what does it do for this Carolina team that the main thing you're building around offensively is arguably the best running back in the country?
It just gives them confidence. You know, the crazy thing about just observing Hampton on the sideline is how much he just wears down the defense. You know, he could have, I think he only had 40 or 50 yards in the first half, but he just gradually wears down the defense because he punishes tacklers every time they try to tackle him. He was on the field for probably 90% or more of the UNC offensive snaps. Like, that's a ton for a running back.
30 carries too.
30 carries and 5 receptions. He touched the ball 35 times, but we needed him to touch the ball that many times. Like, think back to when Mike Carter and Javonte were playing. They would play 50% of the game, and Hampton played probably 94% of the game. So, you know, he legitimately put the team on his back, and he's just such a workhorse, and he doesn't even like show a ton of emotion. He's just literally so single focused, locked in on, when I get this ball, I'm going to go punish a defender and try to fall forward every time. And that just gradually wears on a defense. And that's kind of the identity that we want to take as a team, offensively and defensively. We want to control the line of scrimmage, be able to run the ball, bleed the clock, and, you know, it worked in our favor. So, you know, we can nitpick the quarterbacks, the receivers, but, you know, at the end of the day, if you have 2-8 and a big offensive line, you know, I like those odds.
You start watching a lot of Big Ten football, start watching a lot of Iowa Hawkeyes football, because I think that's going to be the game plan for Carolina with what they have right now at the quarterback position and with what they have roster-wise. But at the very least, you do have Omarion Hampton, and Carolina was able to score its fewest points in a win since defeating Miami 18-14 back in 2012. Schott, when you're out there as a defense, is that something that you're conscious of as the game's unfolding, knowing that, like, you have to be sharper when you're playing with an offense that is struggling to score, and your margin for error might be even smaller because of that?
I think it's kind of like a competition between the offense and defense in game. You're like, you know, if the offense is kind of stalling, then you're like, okay, I'm going to put my side of the ball on my back for this, piece of the game. And we're going to, get a couple stops to inject some confidence back in the offense, or vice versa. If the defense isn't playing well, then the offense is like, all right, we got to go down and score 2 or 3 times to let the defense know that we have their back. And, that's kind of how we played this game. Our defense just kept us in the game, kept the game close. And the good thing about our offense was the majority of the drives, they resulted in points. And 3 points, those add up. As you can see, we won the game because we had 4 field goals. If an offense, goes the length of the field and, they get to the red zone and they don't put any points on the board, then that's really deflating for a team. So give our offense credit, and obviously our kicker credit, that as we move the ball down the field, we didn't have many drives where it was just nothing. it was we were putting at least 3 points on the board, and you look up in the second half, we don't have any touchdowns, but we have 12 points, and we outscored them 12-3 in the second half, and that's the difference in the game. But as a defense, I'm going to be honest, a lot of times when I was playing, it was the offense that was carrying us. So you kind of feed off each other in terms of which side of the ball is going to make a play to get the ball back to the other unit. So, like I said, win ugly and good complementary football, and that's what we did.
Yeah, there's almost that feeling of not wanting to let the other unit down and being the perceptive weak link, because if you are the weak link, whether it's losing a game that's in the 50s or losing a game that's in the teens, that side of the ball kind of knows that a lot of the burden of the loss kind of falls on them. But a quick break so I can remind everybody about our friends over at Johnny T-Shirt. If you're going to be in Chapel Hill, and there's a good chance you're going to be in Chapel Hill with 3 straight home games, you can visit Johnny T-Shirt on Franklin Street. And if not, no worries. You could go online to johnnytshirt.com. They have all the gear that the Carolina fan could possibly want: the hats, the T-shirts, the jerseys. You name it, they've got it. It's great people and great customer service. And don't forget, Inside Carolina premium subscribers save 10% off their orders. Sean, I just mentioned it. Carolina, 3 straight home games: NC Central, UNC Charlotte, James Madison. We talked about on a previous episode that Carolina did have a soft schedule early on after the Minnesota game. Now that kind of plays in their favor because you're breaking in a new quarterback with Conner Harrell. How do you see the offense changing as you go from Max Johnson to Conner Harrell?
I honestly think we're going to do a lot of similar stuff. I mean, if you watch the game when Max was in the game, we did do a decent amount of boots and nakeds and that sort of thing. And that's the thing that you have to capitalize with Conner Harrell is use his athletic ability. I mean, you saw the biggest play he made in the game was where, late in the fourth quarter on that last drive, there's a zone read, there's 2 defenders coming off the edge. He makes the right read to pull it. He gets outside of that defender, and then JJ Jones' defender comes to tackle him, and he just dunks the ball over his head. And that kind of showed his athletic ability and kind of the off-platform plays that he can make with his legs and his athletic ability. So more of that. He did throw a couple good balls. He threw a good corner route to JJ Jones that, I think he should have caught. I don't think there's going to be a lot of like true drop back pass where, he's reading the progression of the defense and IDing coverages and going like Drake did from his first read to second read to third read. I think we're going to see more, zone reads, quarterback runs, quarterback counters, and that sort of thing. So, when he's in the game, we're going to be able to, I think, use the tight ends a little bit more. I think the tight ends and the running backs are going to have the bulk of the catches when Conner Harrell's in the game, just because, he'll be able to, run nakeds and get tight ends and crossers and easy, dump passes in the flats. I don't think he's going to, beat a team, 4 wide and them running, all the route tree and him just, standing back there like whoever, Joe Burrow, It'll be interesting to see kind of what Chip Lindsey does in these next few games. But, I imagine we're gonna rely heavy on Hampton. We're gonna have to get more carries for Barlow and some of the other guys, but it's gonna be a sight to see. And obviously these next 3 opponents are 3 good opponents to quote unquote break Conner Harrell in and let him get some confidence. So the thing that I respect about Coach Brown so much is he injected confidence into Conner Harrell, and he played the game where, he didn't name a starter too early, because maybe if he did, Conner transfers, and look what would happen. We'd be stuck with Jacoby Criswell, who, I love the guy, but I don't know if he could get it done at this point. So the game that he played to allow Conner to get a bunch of reps, compete, and then now he's thrust into the starting position, and, it's his team. He's got to lead the offense, and, Obviously he's going to be the starter for the rest of the year. So I think it'll give our offensive staff the ability to be creative and see what they can do to change things up. So,
yeah, I think one thing that we heard all season was we knew Max Johnson and Conner Harrell both had a good amount of deficiencies for the quarterback position, but there was an understanding from the coaching staff that, hey, we can understand where these two guys are at, but we know how to scheme them up to put them in the best position possible. And as a result, it's going to put the team in the best position possible. And I think the closest thing you saw to that was the drive you mentioned earlier, where you start the second half and it's a lot of quick game. It's a lot of screens. It's a lot of misdirections and trying to keep the defense off balance to where they're not just statues dropping back. But the one worry with that is that this offense, I think, does become a bit handcuffed when you have a negative play or you have a receiver like J.J. Jones drop a play and all of a sudden instead of a 3rd and 3, it's a 3rd and 9. And a 3rd and 9 with Conner Harrell and Max Johnson was not the same as a 3rd and 9 with Drake May. And it kind of feels to make an NFL equivalent to that. When the Chiefs are in like a 3rd and 15 for Patrick Mahomes, it feels like a 3rd and 3 with his level of talent. But when you're watching, like I mentioned before, like an Iowa game, when Iowa's in a 3rd and 7, it feels like a 3rd and 45, where it's like, okay, I know they can't do this. So I think Carolina does have to be a bit mindful of that and put their quarterback in better situations to not have those 3rd and longs, those 3rd and mediums, because I don't know if you have the arm talent to win and put you in good spots there. So I think that's kind of breaking down where we're at with these quarterbacks.
Here's why I think Max won the job is because he had less turnover worthy plays in training camp. And I think that's the kind of the issue you run into Conner with is he might be turnover prone. I mean, you saw it when he escaped the pocket and got the ball knocked out. Like he's got to be hyper aware of protecting the ball. If he protects the ball, then we have a good chance, because Max Johnson wasn't this drop back quarterback that can just, dice him up all across the field. Him and Conner play a similar game in terms of what they're able to do, but Conner is probably more elusive and faster and can get the ball on the perimeter more. So we're going to tap more into that. But I think if Conner can just be turnover conscious and protect the football, then there's not too much of a difference between him and Max. And the positive is he's a better athlete and a better runner. So, if we can get him to really tap into that while, not turning the ball over, then, I don't think it's a huge loss.
Yeah. And
even though I was the guy saying all preseason that Max got to be the guy.
Yeah.
But if we can get Conner to understand that, hey, if I don't turn the ball over, then we got a pretty good chance, because we do have a good defense. We have good special teams, and we have 2-8 in the backfield.
Yeah. The consensus seemed too out of training camp that it was always going to be Max Johnson. And I think you saw a bit of that when Conner Harrell goes into the game late, where the offense felt like it was kind of going into survival mode, where some fans are questioning, why didn't Carolina, let Conner Harrell try to make a play on the 3rd and 6 with his arm? It's most likely because they don't trust Conner Harrell to make a play with his arm. And if you run a draw or something, at the very least, you're going to just get back to the line of scrimmage if he's able to hold on to the ball and you're not pushing Noah Burnette further back. And with Noah Burnette, as reliable as he is, you want to keep that field goal within his range. And we saw that strategy did work out for them ultimately.
And it's also way tougher for a quarterback to get thrust into the game late in the 3rd quarter after sitting for 2.5 hours, and then obviously during practice, the last 10 days, he's probably getting 20% of the reps while Max is getting 80. So you can't get a true read on his performance just due to the fact that he was sitting the whole game. He wasn't getting all the reps. So hopefully, going forward now we have an extended break. We don't play till next Saturday. He's going to get all the first team reps. So he'll get more confidence, more work with the first team unit and be more comfortable. And he'll be and they'll tailor the game plan around his strength. So, it'll be telling to see kind of what we do in the next game and the next couple. Because like I said, it is tough getting thrust into the game when, if you're the backup, especially at quarterback, you're not playing special teams. You think there's no chance you're going to go in the game if you're the backup quarterback for the most part. And for him to come in and make some winning plays to help us win was, that should only give him confidence going forward.
All right, let's take a quick break so I can remind everybody about our friends over at Congruity. Congruity is the leading provider for Tar Heel business owners, payroll, HR, and employee benefit needs. Inside Carolina listeners can get a free payroll and HR assessment by emailing Matt at Congruity. Email is matt@congruityhr.com. That email again is matt@congruityhr.com. All right, let's get back to the episode. Yeah, and before we get out of here, we'll look at the Pro Football Focus grades, get Shot's take on it, and any last thoughts. If you look at the defense Shot, the top 5 graded players, Alijah Huzzie, number 1, Amari Campbell, number 2, Javari Ritzie, 3, Power Echols, 4, Kamon Rucker, 5. For the most part, would you say that does pass the eye test? That those are our 5 guys?
I mean, when we talked before the episode, I said Campbell, Huzzie, and Rucker and Ritzie. And what I want to talk about Huzzie real quick, he is just a complete football player. The thing that stood out to me the most was his versatility of everything he does on the football field, of playing. Last year he was playing the star, the nickel, the slot corner. Now he jumps outside and he hasn't skipped a beat. His footwork is incredible, his tackling ability, his angles. And then to watch him go return punts, and he's explosive as a punt returner.
Yeah.
And then on the flip side, he's one of our gunners on punt.
Yeah.
His ability to just play all these different units and force a fair catch, down a punt inside the 5. Meanwhile, playing all the snaps on defense. You watched Travis Hunter last night on Colorado. Like he impacts the game in so many ways, and that's the exact same way Huzzie does. Not to that level that Travis Hunter does of 3 touchdowns on offense, but just his competitiveness. He's just such an all-around good player. And then moving on to Campbell, what I think is so important nowadays as an off-the-ball linebacker is your ability to make splash plays. So, you're expecting your 2 inside backers to make 8 to 12 tackles a game. Like that's just their job. The ball flows to them. They're the second level defender. They're going to make those tackles. But what splash plays are sacks, TFLs, forced fumbles, interceptions. And what did Amari Campbell have? He had a huge sack where he put a swim move on the guard, got the quarterback down. He knocked the ball out. Those are 2 huge plays in the game. Obviously, he missed a sack because he couldn't really wrap up the quarterback because of his club. But the ability for a young linebacker to make splash plays, like if you turn on Luke Kuechly's film, he's constantly making PBUs, INTs, not just like tackles 4 yards, down the field. He's making plays that are turnover-worthy plays or big plays in the game that really affect the morale of the team. And then Ritzie, having 3 sacks, maybe he's, kind of stepping into his own and kind of tapping into his full potential. Coming out of high school, that guy had offers from everywhere. We were competing. I was on the staff when we were recruiting him. He had Georgia in his ear. I think he had an Alabama offer. I mean, he had everyone in the country, and he's got all the physical tools. He looks the part. He can really run. He played with more aggressiveness and want to, and kind of like that Des Evans X factor where he just plays extremely hard. And Ritzie, for the first time, I saw that from him last night, because all of his sacks, they weren't like he lined up at 3 technique and he just beat the offensive lineman right off the jump and got in the backfield. Most of his sacks were like the quarterback was kind of dancing around and escaping the pocket, and then he went down. He went and hunted him down. And that's really what to see a 3 technique be able to do that, that's really impressive. So Yeah, those three guys, now we're doing the helmet decals, for big plays. And you'll see Huzzie and Amari Campbell and Ritzy with a couple, Tar Heel footprints on their helmets next week.
Yeah. And when you're comparing the Carolina defense to the Minnesota defense, Carolina had 5 sacks. Minnesota had 2 sacks. Carolina had 7 tackles for a loss. Minnesota had 6 tackles for a loss. North Carolina had 14 missed tackles. Minnesota had 19 missed tackles. So Carolina defensively was essentially better across the board. And when you're looking at the offensive grades from Pro Football Focus, I thought this was interesting. Willie Lampkin graded out as Carolina's best player. Aiden Banfield, true freshman, 3-star recruit out of Georgia, graded out as the second best player on the Carolina offense. Trevion Green, the right tackle, grades out third. Austin Blaskey, fourth at center. Omarion Hampton at 5, I don't think is a surprise to see him up there. And then Howard Sampson, 6. All the talk going into this game was around the lack of starts that Carolina's offensive line had at the power 4 level, with everyone being Willie Lampkin. So what do you think about those offensive grades and just hearing where this offensive line was and where this offensive line can be?
It's encouraging. I mean, I don't think there's been a game in MAC 2.0 where we've had, you obviously can't put so much stock into these PFF grades, but to have 5 out of our 6 highest rated players on offense be offensive linemen, we've never had that.
No.
Maybe one in the top 5 has been good,
I don't have to fact check that. We haven't.
So, they'll obviously, they're a young bunch. Willie Lampkin was the only one to start a game prior to that. So, with anything in sports, the more reps you get, the more confidence you get, the more success you have. And those guys are motivated to block for Hampton because they know they don't have to be perfect. They have to, create movement, create some space, and Hampton's going to make guys miss, and he's going to run through guys, and they want to block their ass off for him because they know that the type of talent he has, and they don't want to let him down. So I think he's patting them on the back, patting them on the butt, the whole plane ride home, and saying, good work, big fellas, because keep this up, and we can win like this if you guys can create. Especially Minnesota's got a good front seven, so. That was a good opening test. I think it's more important for a young team or young offensive line to play against a good opponent first to kind of see where they size up against, rather than playing versus NC Central or an Elon or an A&T or one of those schools, because physically they're just going to overpower them. But to beat a legit Big Ten, front seven, their confidence is only going to grow.
An extended break now, and then Carolina back in action September 7th in Chapel Hill, the home opener, 3:30 kickoff against UNC Charlotte. We will be back after that game to break it all down. Schott, appreciate the time and appreciate everybody watching and listening.